Hey guys, my name is Gideon Wilson and this is my speech on ACE2 receptors and COVID-19 and how they influence genetic susceptibility and resistance. Isn't this disease only supposed to last a few weeks? This was the question everybody was asking when the COVID-19 pandemic first started, but little did we all know this was more serious than we could ever imagine. Schools, offices, and even some hospitals had to close their doors because of the risk and the infection rates of this deadly virus. It was a completely different time 6 years ago, and today we will look at a brief background of the disease itself, the current research on genetic factors that could potentially play a role in its resistance or susceptibility, and what this research can mean for us as human beings going into the future. First, let's look at a brief background to understand what this virus was and how it began. The COVID-19 outbreak emerged at the very end of 2019 and put the world on hold for the better part of 2 years. The disease itself, otherwise called coronavirus disease 2019, is caused by an infection that the National Library of Medicine calls severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2, or SARS-CoV-2 for short. Now, there are two main theories as to how this disease started. One involves a laboratory spillover event, while the other one involves humans eating animals that are the carriers of this disease. Neither one of these are confirmed and are still being investigated on to this day and will continue to be until a for sure answer can be given. The most widespread outbreak to this day was in Wuhan, China, where the first cases were found. The high rate of spread led to the CDC calling for a national pandemic, and shortly after, in March of 2020, the world was put on lockdown. Schools closed their doors for months, offices were shut down, mask mandates were issued, and social distancing was in full effect. Some people were not even allowed to leave the house. Now that we know a basic overview, let's look at what this speech is about. COVID-19's genetic makeup and the research into this disease that may or may not influence the disease's susceptibility and resistance to people. As we mentioned earlier, SARS-CoV-2 is the scientific name for this respiratory disease, and according to an article by BMC Medicine, it is strangely and tragically selective. They state that the mortality rate due to COVID-19 is a dramatic rise when it comes to age and coexisting health conditions like cancer, hypertension, and cardiovascular disease. In the study itself, the doctors and scientists worked together to investigate the genetic susceptibility by examining DNA polymorphisms in the ACE2 receptors and TMPRSS2 enzymes, which are now proven to be two key factors of SARS-CoV-2. From approximately 81,000 human genomes. If you are curious as to what an ACE2 receptor and TMPRSS2 enzyme is, I will explain more in depth. An ACE2 receptor is the little receptor on the outside of many kinds of cells inside the human body, including the lungs, heart, and kidney. They regulate blood pressure, salt, and water balance, glucose homeostasis, and amino acid absorption in the small intestine and kidney. They are what the SARS-CoV-2 virus looks like when it's looking for a host cell, and when infected, they allow viral entry into said cell. Here's a photo of what an ACE2 receptor would look like. Here's the viral entry point. Here's a photo of what it would look like when the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein binded to an ACE2 receptor. Think of this infection as the SARS-CoV-2 being a parasite and the ACE2 being the host organism, and once it is infected, it slowly starts to limit bodily functions, but in the form of a cell. The TMPRSS2 enzyme belongs to the serine protease family, meaning that it cleaves peptide bonds in proteins. This specific enzyme acts as an activator for certain viruses, including COVID-19. These two unique receptors are what allows the virus to make an entry into the host cell and lead to the infection. The scientists also found unique genetic susceptibility across different populations in ACE2 and TMPRSS2 receptors. The ACE2 was found to be associated with cardiovascular and pulmonary conditions, like altering the angiotensin ACE2 interactions in the African American population. This interaction is used to help regulate blood pressure. Ultimately, this experiment concluded that these two receptors were likely associated with genetic susceptibility of COVID-19. Furthermore, in a research journal published in April 2022 by the American Heart Association, it talks more about what these two receptors can mean for resistance and susceptibility in humans. In the first part of the journal, it details how ACE2 is the main key to infection, but also points out how the same receptor is the key to treatment, something that the previous BMC Medicine article did not. Here is what the TMPRSS2 enzyme would look like. As we can see, this is the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein. Here's the ACE2 receptor, this little purple one down here. And this is the TMPRSS2 enzyme, or the activator. This photo just shows basically what it would look like when the when the spike protein connects to an ACE2 receptor cell. This association conducted what they call the largest genome-wide association meta-analysis of plasma ACE2 levels in more than 28,000 individuals of the scallop corticeum, which stands for Systematic and Combined Analysis of O-link Proteins. They estimated that relevant genetic correlations with cardiometabolic phenotypes, COVID-19, and the complexity of human traits and diseases would lead to a higher likelihood of contracting the disease. When the test concluded, they found 10 loci, or locus, which is the physical location of a gene on a chromosome. 8 of those were being novel, capturing 30% of the heritability of the protein. Based on this find, they were able to detect that plasma ACE2 was genetically correlated with vascular diseases, severe COVID-19, and a wide range of human complex diseases, also finding medications as well. Specifically, they found that an X chromosome cis protein loci-based Mendelian random analysis suggested a causal effect of more elevated ACE2 levels based on COVID-19 severity and infection. In the final statements of the journal, they conclude that human plasma ACE2 shares a genetic basis with COVID-19 and other related diseases. Although this research sheds light as to how COVID-19 works and infects a host cell, I wanted to focus on what this means for the people for my last point. This research will benefit us in a way as doctors found the main point of entry, but also the cure. Every day, there are new discoveries in fields that are helping individuals overcome this specific virus, along with many other diseases that follow in its path. Within finding the direct correlation between ACE2 receptors and COVID-19, the National Library of Medicine states that there are some naturally resistant, that some are naturally resistant and some aren't. They suggest that potential mechanisms of natural resistance include host genetic variants, viral interference, cross-protective natural antibodies, T-cell immunity, and highly effective immune responses. They believe that infection severity are based on historical factors, along with age, diet, lifestyle, and environmental factors all playing a key role. They even state that up to 1/3 of people can be infected and not even know it, based on the individual's immune system. These discoveries, including the ones that weren't covered in this speech, have led the way for the FDA to approve many antiviral medicines and treatment options if you were to be contracted with the disease. What the vaccines do is when they are placed into the bloodstream, they locate the free-floating spike proteins and kill them off, which can stop the spread and potentially save lives, as not as many cells can become infected. An important note is that the vaccine is stronger in children and elderly, as their immune systems are often weaker than the normal adult. This should not steer anyone away from receiving it, as getting it as an adult only makes it safer for their immune system as well. Another thing to remember is that the ACE2 proteins that are infected are also making your immune cells create antibodies that fight the spike protein of SARS-CoV-2. Understanding the role of ACE2 receptors is ultimately what accelerated clinical research into both antiviral agents and therapies to help with COVID-19. It is important to understand the effects of COVID-19 on the body, as it can potentially help a sick person understand the necessary treatment. Please speak with a medical professional if you think that you may have the disease or have contracted the disease and are looking for a vaccine. They are medical professionals and will guide you in the right direction for figuring out what way would work best for your specific case. COVID-19 was a very serious pandemic that ultimately infected 704,753,890 victims. It killed 7 million people, while 675 million people recovered. These statistics are as of March 25th, 2025, and will continue to change daily. COVID-19 was one of the worst pandemics that the world has ever seen and will without a doubt be engraved in history. But the important thing is that the world came together as one and followed the guidelines that ultimately kept it from being much worse. Knowing the background, the genetic factors, and the research that was put into it, and what the research can mean for us as people allows for a better overall understanding of the disease and how we can react if a pandemic was to ever start up again. We never know what the next day might bring.